Blindsight by Peter Watts. This is a great book. I'm just going to get that right out there at the beginning because I will discuss spoilers at some point in this review. I'll give a warning when I do um, because you don't want to spoil this book for yourself. It has an air of mystery and horror to it, and it's better going in blind, so to speak, in my opinion. But I did really, really like this book. I'll discuss some kind of technical aspects of it before I get into the spoilers when I discuss the story. Um, this is a first contact novel, and I've read a couple other first contact books somewhere in the last couple of years. The Three Body Problem and Arrival. Both of those are held up as really creative interpretations on the first contact story. In my opinion, this blows both of them out of the water. It has some similarities to both. Arrival, aka Story of Your Life, is about communication and language and how we perceive the world and time. And there's uh, when this book starts, it appears that that's what it's going to be about as well. It evolves into something else, which I won't get into until we get into the spoilers. Um, like both, it even to a greater degree, this is hard sci-fi, very, very hard sci-fi. And I'm not a big fan of hard sci-fi. Um, I don't like to read jargon and technical information, and this has a lot of both. It teeters on the edge of being unreadable to me at times, but it never falls off the edge. It toes the line, but it never quite crosses it. It stays readable and it's paced really well. Like I said, it's paced almost like a mystery or a horror, and it's constantly moving. There is a lot of exposition and hard technical information, but it doesn't really get bogged down in it. It like I said, the pacing is really really well done. I read this book in 2 days, which is saying something for me because I'm a very slow reader. But I tore through it. I was engaged the whole time. It's well written. There are some things about the prose, the technical writing of it that I didn't care for. One is, of course, the hard sci-fi jargon. Um, Another is, and this is a ubiquitous aspect of science fiction, which is like futuristic made up slang, which is just always cringe to me. It always just comes across as fake and stupid. But that's a part of science fiction that I just have to get over, I guess. And there is some of that in here, and it's mixed together with the technical jargon of hard sci-fi that becomes like something that you just want to skim over. But it's written in such a quick pace that you don't have to ever skip anything. Not that I probably would, but in some science fiction, I have skipped stuff because it just becomes so boring. One pet peeve I had with the prose in this, and I admit this is nitpicking, but there's just way too much um, italics for emphasis. It's almost every single line of dialogue, and actually not even just in the dialogue, because this is written in first person, so the narrator is always speaking. But whenever somebody's speaking, there's always an italics of emphasis. Every other line, every single sentence has it, and it's throughout the entire book, every paragraph, everywhere, all the time. And at some point, you just it just stops registering because there's so much of it that you end up just breezing past it, and that makes its inclusion completely pointless in the first place. So I really wonder why there's so much of that in there. I mean, I get that he's trying to convey how he's expecting the readers to understand how these people are speaking, but there's just way too much of it. That's a nitpick. It didn't, it didn't weigh down the book at all, but it did get tedious after a while, and I just started skipping over it. The cast of characters in this book is very interesting for reasons I'll discuss in the spoiler section. It reminded me of almost like Deep Space Nine. There's a character with multiple personalities inside their brain. I think like 5 different ones. It reminded me of like the Trill. All of the characters have something different about their brains. That's kind of what unites the cast, is that they all have some different way of perceiving the world, some different way of thinking. So you have your character with multiple personalities. The main character, the narrator, is missing half of his brain, which changes the way that he understands and perceives things. And one of the characters is a vampire. And just to, I'll briefly discuss the vampire thing here. There's no real point to why there are vampires in the story other than that they just perceive the world differently. So the vampires have been like brought back from extinction by geneticists. And, scientific explanations for vampires are not new. I Am Legend did it, decades ago, and that's a good book. But there's a section at the end of this book that has like notes about some different scientific concepts, and there's a section about the vampires. And so the reason the vampires have aversions to crucifixes is because the way that they evolved to perceive the world, seeing intersecting right angles short circuits their brain, which, from a scientific point of view, if you want to make vampires, I guess that makes sense if you want to have a scientific explanation for all the vampire lore. But it doesn't make sense given the evolutionary timeline that we're given for the vampires in this book, because apparently they all died out and went extinct hundreds of thousands of years ago. And crucifixes as a symbol weren't common at all back then. I mean, considering it's only been 2,000 years since the crucifixion of Jesus, if vampires died out hundreds of thousands of years before that, why would anyone even know that they had an aversion to crucifixes? Because apparently, and maybe I'm just not understanding what he's saying here, but apparently all the vampires were long extinct before Christianity came around. So it doesn't make any sense that that would even be incorporated into the lore at all. Okay, so all of that out of the way, I am going to get into spoilers now to discuss the plot, which is really good. So skip this, close out the video, but like and subscribe before you do if you don't want to hear spoilers. So it's a first contact story. And like I was saying when I brought up Arrival, it kind of appears at first that it's going to be about how we communicate with intelligent life, but it evolves into the question of what intelligence actually is. The entire story is about consciousness. It's about intelligence. It's about, self-awareness. So it turns out that the linguist in the crew becomes, who is the one with multiple personalities, the linguist becomes obsolete when they realize that the aliens have no self-awareness. They're not sentient in the way that humans are. They're essentially like animals. They function on a purely stimulatory basis. They don't have an ego, I guess is what I'm saying. And um, there are so many spiritual questions that are raised by this that the book does not delve into at all. I'm glad that the book stays clear of like Eastern philosophy and the idea of the ego, because that's just not present whatsoever. But the ultimate question that the book poses to you is, why would sentience evolve? Because it's not necessary, in this book, at least, because a very, very advanced life form is encountered that does not have self-awareness, does not have sentience, or an ego. And there's the title of the book, Blindsight, refers to this idea that the book gives you, that there's almost two brains within a person. There's, what people often call the reptile brain, that kind of underlies your conscious awareness. And free will is touched upon. This common scientific idea that your brain kind of makes decisions before you're actually aware of ever making a decision. So it's not you who's really making the decision, it's just your brain. And so, yeah, the kind of thesis is that sentience is not necessary for evolution, so why would it ever evolve? In fact, it might even be detrimental, because the vampires in the story don't have sentient awareness in the same way that the humans do. Like I said, all the characters kind of have a different cognitive framework going on. But the self-evident answer to that question for me is that it's because human beings have souls. So that's why human beings have rational self-awareness and no other animals do. Or maybe they have a hint of it, but not to the degree that we do. To me, that's the self-evident answer to the book's question. Why would sentience evolve? Why would sentience occur? Well, it's because we have souls. And there are some religious themes in this book. All the characters are atheists. It's stated outright. There's one kind of hint, one sentence that says, everyone on the crew was atheist. At least we started that way. But then there's no indication that the main character, at least, ever changes his religious views in light of contact with this very advanced alien life form that doesn't have rational self-awareness like humans do. And the question of why do humans have it at all? And the implication is that humans are the only creatures in the universe, or probably the only ones, that do have this rational self-awareness. And the obvious conclusion is because we have souls. But that's never really implied in the book. The book is completely materialistic. Like I said, there are religious themes. They're kind of cringe. There's this thing called heaven, which is basically the Matrix. You plug your brain into it, and your body goes into like a tank, and your organs get harvested because they're not necessary anymore, and then you just live inside the Matrix that they call heaven, and they call it an afterlife. And I found that really cringe. And that's probably like the least interesting and creative idea in this book. Overall, I did really like it, obviously, but yeah, that part I found really cringe. The main character's mother goes into into heaven, but then dies at the end because somebody destroys the framework of of the servers or whatever, or cuts off their life support or something. I don't think it specifies exactly what happens. But yeah, so the character in the afterlife actually dies. I don't really know what we're supposed to get from that aspect of the story. I don't really understand why that theme is incorporated. The author Peter Watts is a marine biologist. That's one of the reasons there's so much hard sci-fi in here, so much hard science going on, I think. Um, and at first you know, your hopes are set up that the biology, at least, of this alien creature is going to be actually alien, something you've never seen before in science fiction. And it has some unique aspects to it, for sure, definitely. But the real alienness of it is in its consciousness and in its nature of intelligence, its version of intelligence. So yeah, the main question of the book is, why would human beings have sentience if it's not necessary for evolution and not even really necessary for basic functioning? Because one of the characters sort of loses his cognitive sight, his perception, his how would I phrase this? His his awareness of his eyesight. He loses it, but his sort of underlying brain stem, his lizard brain, as they say, can still react to all the stimulus that's being input into it. And so he has what's called blindsight. And like I said, to me, the solution to this question is extremely obvious, and it's what everyone on Earth believed up until just about a century ago, which is that human beings have souls. Human beings are created creatures. You know, it's obvious, especially given the question that this book poses. In fact, I think the question that this book poses would be a good argument for the existence of a soul, for the existence of some other, some kind of animating force to our consciousness that we're not aware of, or that we can't measure or understand. To me, this book is actually a pretty good argument for the existence of God. I'm sure Peter Watts does not agree. At least it doesn't seem that way based on the reaction of the characters and everything to the events that occur in this book. But yeah, that's my interpretation of it. So yeah, that's Blindsight. I just finished it like an hour ago or something, so it's still fresh in my mind. Like I said, I read it in 2 days. I will reread it at some point in the future for sure, because I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure I'll get more out of it the next time I read it. Because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of ideas that are proposed by this, but that's my interpretation of the book's themes and the book's questions, which are of a kind of philosophical nature, but very much framed entirely within the realm of science, which to me is not the only realm by which things should be viewed. And so, yeah, that's my interpretation of Blindsight. Highly recommend it. Like I said, to me, this blows other first contact stories I've read out of the water. I did not like the three body problem. I didn't think it was very good at all. It had some unique aspects to it as well. But to me, this is so much more interesting. Certainly much better written than the Three Body Problem. Three Body Problem is not a very well written story at all. Arrival is really good though too. I preferred Blindsight. I haven't read that much sci-fi recently for the reasons I mentioned, that I don't really like to be bogged down in the hard SF, the techno babble. But Blindsight is more of a philosophical novel almost, and it's a very good one. So I'd highly recommend it. That's Blindsight by Peter Watts.